It was a crisp Friday evening in New York City, and the streets buzzed with life. High-end restaurants were teeming with patrons eager to indulge in fine dining experiences. Among these establishments was La Maison Étoile, a chic French restaurant known for its exclusivity and celebrity clientele. Tonight, however, it would be at the center of an unforgettable incident that would leave its staff stunned and the internet buzzing. Barron Trump, now 18, had recently developed a passion for food and writing. With his tall, understated frame and reserved demeanor, he was far from the flashy persona the public often associated with his famous family. Despite his background, he preferred to remain low-key, seeking out the simple pleasures of life, one of which was exploring the culinary world. Having recently been invited to contribute to Gastronome's Journal, a prestigious food critique publication, Barron was on his first official assignment. The magazine had tasked him with reviewing La Maison Étoile. Armed with nothing more than his phone, a small notebook, and a keen palate, he was ready to dive into this new venture. His goal was to assess the experience anonymously, free from the biases that his last name might invite. Barron arrived at the restaurant promptly at 7:30 p.m., dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks. The air inside the restaurant was thick with the aroma of truffle oil, roasted duck, and freshly baked baguettes. Soft jazz played in the background as patrons clinked glasses of wine. Approaching the host stand, Barron smiled politely at the maitre d'. "Good evening. I have a reservation for one under the name Elliot's." The maitre d', a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a tailored suit, gave him a once-over. "Yes, table for one," he said, grabbing a menu. "Right this way." As Barron followed, he noticed the restaurant's lavish decor, chandeliers dripping with crystals, elegant white tablecloths, and golden accents on every surface. It was opulence at its finest. He was seated at a small table in the corner, near a window that offered a view of the bustling street outside. "Your server will be with you shortly," the maitre d' said before disappearing. Minutes later, a young waiter approached Barron's table. His name tag read Mark, and his demeanor was anything but welcoming. With a disinterested expression, he slapped the menu onto the table and said, "What can I get you to drink?" Barron, taken aback by the lack of courtesy, maintained his composure. "I'll have a glass of sparkling water, please." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Just water? You sure you're in the right place? Most people start with a cocktail or wine." "I'm fine with water, thank you," Barron replied calmly, sensing the subtle judgment in Mark's tone. With a shrug, Mark walked away, muttering something under his breath. Barron, choosing not to let it bother him, opened the menu and began perusing the offerings. He took note of the extravagant prices and the array of French delicacies, jotting down his initial impressions in his notebook. When Mark returned with the water, he set the glass down with a clink. "Have you decided yet?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. "Yes," Barron said. "I'll start with the escargot and then have the coq au vin as my main course." Mark smirked. "Escargot and coq au vin? Classic choices. Let's hope you can appreciate them." Barron ignored the snide remark, offering a polite thank you as Mark walked away. He couldn't help but notice the waiter's dismissive attitude. It was clear Mark had pegged him as someone unimportant, perhaps assuming he was just another young man trying to appear sophisticated. As the evening progressed, Mark's behavior only grew worse. When the escargot arrived, Mark dropped the plate onto the table without so much as a word, spilling a bit of the buttery sauce onto the tablecloth. Barron watched him walk away without an apology, his patience wearing thin. Despite the service, Barron focused on the food. The escargot was rich and garlicky, its flavors perfectly balanced. He meticulously noted the texture, seasoning, and presentation, determined to give the dish a fair assessment. When the coq au vin arrived, Mark placed it down with the same carelessness as before. "Enjoy," he said curtly before disappearing. The dish, a hearty French stew of chicken braised in red wine, looked immaculate. Barron took a bite, savoring the tender meat and the complex flavors of the sauce. It was clear the kitchen staff were masters of their craft, even if the front-of-house service left much to be desired. Halfway through his meal, Barron noticed a commotion at a nearby table. A group of well-dressed patrons, clearly wealthy, had entered and were being fawned over by the staff. Mark, in particular, seemed eager to please them, his demeanor entirely different from how he had treated Barron. "Ah, Mr. Harrison," Mark exclaimed, practically bowing. "Welcome back. Can I start you off with our finest champagne?" Barron watched the interaction with mild amusement. It was obvious Mark prioritized those he believed could tip generously or elevate his standing. Little did Mark know, the unassuming young man in the corner was writing a review that could make or break the restaurant's reputation. As Barron finished his meal, he signaled for the dessert menu. Mark approached, his tone as dismissive as ever. "Dessert? Really? You sure you want to spend that much?" Barron met his gaze, his calm exterior betraying none of the frustration he felt. "Yes, I'd like the creme brulee, please." Mark rolled his eyes but took the order. Barron couldn't help but think about how different the evening might have been if he had been treated with the same courtesy as the other patrons. When the dessert arrived, it was, unsurprisingly, exceptional. The caramelized sugar on top cracked perfectly under his spoon, revealing the creamy custard beneath. Barron took his time savoring each bite, knowing it would be the final element of his review. As Barron finished his meal and prepared to leave, he asked for the check. Mark brought it over, barely glancing at him as he set it down. "Hope everything was acceptable," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Barron smiled faintly. "It was an experience," he said, leaving a modest tip before gathering his things. As he exited the restaurant, he overheard Mark muttering to a colleague, "What a waste of a table. Probably won't even tip enough to cover the silverware." Barron shook his head, amused by the irony. He walked out into the cool night air, his mind already buzzing with thoughts for his review. A week later, the review was published in Gastronome's journal. Titled Luxury Without Warmth, A Night at La Maison Étoile, it detailed Barron's experience with unflinching honesty. He praised the food and the artistry of the chefs but highlighted the abysmal service he had received, particularly from Mark. "The evening was a study in contrasts," Barron wrote. While the kitchen staff delivered culinary masterpieces, the front-of-house service left a bitter taste. The dismissive attitude of certain staff members, who seemed to judge patrons based on perceived wealth, detracted from what could have been a flawless dining experience. The review quickly went viral, sparking outrage among readers and patrons. Social media was flooded with comments condemning the behavior described in the article. Back at La Maison Étoile, chaos ensued. The restaurant's owner, a stern but fair woman named Claudine, summoned the staff for an emergency meeting. The article was printed and placed on the table for all to see. "Does anyone have anything to say about this?" Claudine asked, her voice icy. Mark, now pale and fidgeting, avoided her gaze. "I didn't know who he was," he mumbled. "He didn't look important." Claudine's expression hardened. "Every customer is important," she said sharply. "It doesn't matter who they are or what they look like. Your behavior reflects on this entire establishment." Mark tried to defend himself, but it was no use. The damage had been done, and the restaurant's reputation was at stake. Claudine made it clear that such conduct would not be tolerated, issuing a public apology on behalf of the restaurant and promising to address the issues raised in the review. As for Barron, he continued his journey as a food critic, his first review setting a high standard for the honesty and integrity he would bring to the field. Despite the chaos his article had caused, he hoped it would serve as a lesson that kindness and respect should be extended to all, regardless of appearances. In the end, the experience was a reminder to everyone involved that true hospitality isn't just about the food on the plate but the warmth with which it's served. And for Barron, it was the beginning of a career that promised to be as impactful as it was unexpected.